Have you ever heard someone say that Nepal doesn't really have a government? It sounds crazy,
Yeah.
right? But today,
Yeah.
we're going to dive into some sources about the political situation in Nepal.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's more complex than just a simple yes or no answer.
Interesting.
Our mission today is to look at whether Nepal is truly without a government, what that even means, and what the real-world consequences are for the Nepalese people.
Yeah.
We're working mainly with excerpts from Nepal's governance, examining political instability and its consequences. Buckle up, because this is going to be fascinating.
Sounds good.
So
Yeah.
is Nepal really without a government?
Well, that's a great question to start with. I think when we hear without a government, it's easy to think about like complete chaos.
Right.
But that's not exactly the case here. Nepal does have a government structure in place. It's officially a federal democratic republic with a parliamentary system.
Okay, so there's a structure.
Yeah.
But where's the catch?
The catch is in how well that structure actually functions.
Right.
Imagine a country that has gone through 13 prime ministers in just 15 years.
Whoa, that's almost a new prime minister every single year.
Pretty much.
What does that kind of rapid turnover tell us about their system?
It really points to a deep instability that has been a problem in Nepal's politics for decades. And even getting rid of the monarchy back in 2008 didn't fix this issue.
So we're talking about a government that exists on paper, but struggles to actually function in the real world. How does that instability show itself in what's happening in Nepal's politics right now?
Well, it's a complex situation with lots of different factors involved.
Okay.
We constantly see coalition breakdowns, which end up with parliaments being dissolved.
Right.
And get this, the Supreme Court has actually had to step in and put the dissolved parliament back together multiple times.
Whoa. The Supreme Court having to intervene like that is a pretty big red flag, right?
It is.
What does that tell us about the state of their leadership?
It shows a huge leadership crisis.
Yeah.
Prime ministers can barely stay in power long enough to make any real changes.
Right. And this instability trickles down to every level. And we see the effects in things like widespread corruption and a really inefficient bureaucracy.
And I'm assuming that means really slow and probably ineffective public services for everyday people.
Absolutely. This creates a frustrating situation for the people of Nepal who are dealing with a government that struggles to provide even the most basic services.
So we're seeing this contrast between the structure of government and its ability to actually serve the people.
Right.
But let's dig deeper into the consequences of this dysfunctional government. What are the real-world impacts for the people of Nepal?
The impacts are really broad, affecting everything from the economy to social well-being and even their nations standing on the global stage.
Let's start with the economy. I'm guessing all this uncertainty makes it a tough place for businesses to thrive.
Yeah, exactly. Foreign investors get hesitant because of the unpredictable politics.
Makes sense.
And this leads to slow economic growth, especially compared to neighboring countries. Domestically, the instability also contributes to rising unemployment. It sounds like it could lead to a brain drain with talented people looking for opportunities elsewhere.
Yep.
Is that something Nepal is dealing with?
Unfortunately, yes. We are seeing a growing trend of people moving out of the country, especially young and skilled professionals looking for better prospects outside Nepal. This loss of skilled workers, especially in important fields like healthcare and engineering, further holds back the country's development.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And it's not just the economic consequences, right? What about essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure?
All of those vital sectors suffer a lot without consistent leadership and funding. Schools end up under-resourced, hospitals struggle to give proper care, and infrastructure projects, especially in rural areas, face constant delays.
So this lack of a stable functioning government creates this cascade of negative effects that ripple through every part of Nepalese society.
It's the unfortunate reality. And it's important to keep in mind that this isn't just about abstract political ideas.
Right.
This is about the daily lives and well-being of real people.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in the political jargon, but ultimately it's the people who are dealing with these challenges.
Exactly. And this already difficult situation is made even worse by Nepal's unique location between two powerful neighbors, India and China.
It's like walking a tightrope. How does Nepal manage its relationships with these major powers, especially when its own government is constantly changing?
It's a super delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
Having strong and stable relationships with both India and China is critical for Nepal's security and economic well-being. But with inconsistent leadership and an unpredictable foreign policy, navigating these complex relationships is really difficult.
And that must create a lot of uncertainty and anxiety for the people of Nepal who are caught in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war.
Imagine trying to plan for your future, build a business, or even just raise a family when the political landscape is constantly shifting. It's incredibly tough to thrive in that kind of environment.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture of Nepal's political situation.
Yeah.
But our source material also mentions some glimmers of hope. Are there any signs that things could be moving in a more positive direction?
There definitely are. We're seeing a growing movement pushing for changes to the Constitution
Well,
with the goal of creating a more stable and functional system.
interesting.
And this is getting a lot of attention, especially among Nepal's younger generation.
That's encouraging to hear. Is this youth involvement turning into action? Are they making their voices heard in the political system?
Absolutely. Nepal's youth are becoming more and more active in politics. They're demanding accountability and pushing for real change. They're using social media to raise awareness, organizing protests, and even running for office themselves. They're bringing fresh perspectives and a real determination to break free from this cycle of instability.
It's inspiring to see young people taking charge of their future. Is there any pressure from the international community for Nepal to stabilize its political situation?
Yes, there's growing pressure from the international community for stability and good governance in Nepal. Organizations like the UN and the World Bank are connecting their aid and support to real progress in these areas. They know that without a functioning government, development efforts are unlikely to be successful.
So it seems like there are some positive developments, but it's still a long road ahead for Nepal.
Definitely. The question is, will these efforts be enough to overcome decades of deep-rooted political instability?
It's a question we'll keep exploring as we continue this deep dive into the complexities of Nepal's politics.
Yeah.
But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Yeah.
We've established that Nepal technically has a government structure, but how well it functions is seriously hampered by constant instability and a leadership crisis.
Yeah.
And this dysfunction has serious consequences for the people of Nepal, affecting their economy, access to essential services, and even their nation's standing in the world. But we've also found some encouraging signs, like the growing movement for constitutional reform and the increasing political engagement of Nepal's young people. The path ahead is still uncertain,
Yeah.
but these glimmers of hope offer a potential roadmap to a more stable and prosperous future.
And as we look more closely at these hopeful developments, it's important to remember that the ultimate power to change things lies with the people of Nepal. They are the ones who will decide the fate of their nation.
And with that in mind, let's take a short break, and then we'll continue our deep dive, exploring these potential pathways toward a brighter future for Nepal.
So we were just discussing the hope for a brighter future in Nepal. It's a fascinating idea to think about because how do you even measure hope in a situation this complicated?
That's a good point. It's easy to talk about hope like it's this abstract thing, but what does it actually look like on the ground in Nepal? Like, what are some concrete examples we can point to?
Well, one of the most promising things happening is this push for constitutional reform. There's this growing agreement that the current constitution, which was adopted in 2015, has some built-in problems that are making the political instability worse.
So what are some of the specific reforms that people are talking about, and what kind of impact do they have?
A big focus is on the electoral system. Some people argue that the current system, which is a mix of first-past-the-post and proportional representation, actually encourages smaller parties to just go for short-term wins instead of thinking about long-term stability.
I see what you mean. If parties are always fighting for power in these shaky coalitions, it's hard to imagine how they could get anything meaningful done.
Right, and that's why some are suggesting switching to a more proportional system, which could help political parties work together better and find some common ground.
Are there any other proposed reforms that stand out?
Another big debate is about the role of the prime minister. Some people think that giving the prime minister more power to dissolve parliament or call for early elections could actually make things less stable.
That seems counterintuitive, but I can see how it could backfire if a prime minister uses those powers for their own benefit instead of for the good of the country.
Exactly. So finding the right balance of power between the different parts of government is a really important part of these constitutional reforms.
It's a delicate process,
Yeah.
and I bet there's a lot of disagreement about the best way to do it.
Oh, definitely. There's no magic solution, and what works in one country might not work in another. It's a process that needs careful thought, open discussion, and a willingness to compromise.
And speaking of open discussion, we mentioned earlier how Nepal's young people are getting more involved in politics.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways they're pushing for change beyond these calls for constitutional reform?
We're seeing this interesting mix of old and new approaches.
Look what?
On one hand, there is a comeback of grassroots activism, with young people organizing protests and demonstrations to demand more accountability from their leaders.
It's that classic activism taking to the streets to make their voices heard.
Yeah, but it's not just about street protests. They're also really smart about using social media to get the word out, mobilize support, and hold their elected officials accountable online.
It's fascinating how social media has become such a powerful tool for political change, especially for younger generations.
Yeah, it lets them bypass the traditional media and talk directly to each other, organize events, and put pressure on their leaders in ways they couldn't before.
It's like a whole new era of activism.
Yeah.
And beyond raising awareness and protesting, are young people actually running for office themselves?
Oh, yeah. We're seeing more and more young people running for office at both the local and national levels. They're bringing fresh perspectives, new ideas, and a real desire to break away from the old way of doing politics.
It's inspiring to see that kind of passion and commitment from the younger generation.
Yeah.
But are they facing any pushback from the people who are already in power? Is it easy for them to break into the system?
It's definitely not easy. They're often up against these established political families, powerful groups, and a system that doesn't like to change.
Sounds like a real David and Goliath situation.
Yeah, it is. But, in that story, sometimes the underdog can win. These young leaders are challenging the way things are done, pushing for more transparency, and demanding that the government actually focuses on what people need.
It sounds like a real grassroots movement for change.
It is. And whether they succeed will depend on how well they can rally support, build alliances, and convince voters that they offer a real alternative to the old way of doing things.
It's a fascinating story unfolding in Nepal, one that shows how powerful collective action can be and how young people have the potential to bring about real change.
And it's a story that's still being written. The outcome is still uncertain, but one thing's for sure, the future of Nepal will be shaped by the energy, idealism, and determination of its young people.
It reminds us that hope, even when it feels fragile, can be a really powerful force for change. But before we get too optimistic, let's step back a bit and think about the bigger picture. We talked earlier about how Nepal has to carefully manage its relationships with its powerful neighbors, India and China.
Right. That's super important to understand when we talk about Nepal's politics.
Yeah.
Imagine being a small country sandwiched between two giants, each with their own agendas and ambitions.
It's a situation with a lot of potential problems.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of how this plays out in Nepal's daily life?
Sure. A recent example is Nepal's agreement with China to build a railway line that connects the two countries.
Okay.
Some people in Nepal saw this as a huge economic opportunity, a chance to boost trade and connect with the world.
It seems like a win-win connecting Nepal to a major global power like China. But I'm guessing it wasn't that straightforward.
Not really. The agreement worried India, which is suspicious of China's growing influence in the region.
So Nepal is stuck in the middle trying to stay on good terms with both while they compete for influence.
Exactly. It's like walking a tightrope,
Right.
and it requires careful diplomacy, strategic thinking, and a clear understanding of what's going on in the region.
And how does all the political instability inside Nepal affect this? Does it make it harder to manage these complex relationships with other countries?
Absolutely. When your own government is constantly changing, it's really tough to have a consistent foreign policy or negotiate effectively on the world stage.
Like trying to build a house on shaky ground.
Yeah.
You need a solid foundation to deal with all the pressure from outside.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of people believe that finding a way to create more political stability within Nepal is not just important for them internally, but it's also key to navigating these tricky relationships with their neighbors.
It's a fascinating and intricate web of challenges and opportunities. But beyond all the politics and strategies, we need to remember that there are real people at the center of all this.
Absolutely. The people of Nepal are the ones who ultimately experience the consequences of these political and geopolitical realities. Their lives are directly affected by the decisions their leaders make, the relationships they have with their neighbors, and the overall stability of their country.
So as we continue this deep dive, let's shift our focus to the human impact of these complex issues. We've talked about the economic struggles, the problems with essential services, and the pressure from other countries. But what does all this mean for the everyday lives of the people in Nepal?
That's the most important question, and one that we'll explore more deeply in the next part of our deep dive. We'll hear the stories of individuals and communities who are facing these challenges, their hopes, their dreams, their struggles, and their resilience.
It's a good reminder that behind all the political headlines and analysis, there are human stories that need to be told.
And those stories can teach us a lot about the true cost of instability, the enduring power of hope, and the potential for people to create a better future.
And with that, let's pause for a moment to gather our thoughts, and then we'll continue exploring Nepal's political situation, this time through the lens of human experience.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about the big political challenges in Nepal.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to make sure we don't forget about the human side of things.
For sure. It's important to connect those big issues to what's actually happening in the lives of the Nepalese people.
Exactly. And there was this quote from our source material that really stuck with me. It said something like, "The lack of a stable government has pushed a lot of young Nepalese people to look for opportunities in other countries, which is causing a serious brain drain."
Right. That really highlights the real consequences of this instability. We're not just talking about abstract ideas here. We're talking about people's lives, their hopes, their futures being directly affected.
It's sad to think about having to leave your home, your family, your whole culture, just because your own government can't provide a basic level of stability.
It's a tough choice, but it's one that a lot of young Nepalese people feel like they have to make. They don't see many opportunities at home,
Right.
and they feel like they need to go somewhere else to have a better future, even if it means leaving everything behind.
I'm curious, what's the mood like among the people who decide to stay in Nepal? Is there a sense of like giving up, or is there still hope that things can change?
It's a mix of both, I'd say. There's definitely a lot of frustration and disappointment with the political system.
I can imagine.
People feel let down by their leaders and disillusioned by the lack of progress.
But even with all that frustration, is there also a sense of resilience? Like a determination to make things better?
Oh, absolutely. The Nepalese people are known for their strength, their resilience, their ability to bounce back from tough situations.
Yeah.
You see it in how they respond to natural disasters in their community projects, in their entrepreneurial spirit.
So even when things are tough, they don't give up. They still believe things can get better.
Exactly. It's that spark of hope that keeps them going.
Huh.
They see the potential for a brighter future, and they're actively working to make it happen.
What about the international community? What role can groups like the UN or the World Bank play in helping Nepal become more stable and prosperous?
Well, they can do a few things. They can provide financial support for development projects, offer technical expertise to help the government become stronger, and they can play a key role in resolving conflicts and encouraging dialogue.
It sounds tricky though, right? Providing support without interfering in Nepal's internal affairs.
It is. It's about finding that balance where international assistance helps empower the people of Nepal to take control of their own future.
It's about working together, not imposing solutions from the outside.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that real change has to come from within.
So we've explored all these complexities of Nepal's political situation. We've talked about the challenges, the hopeful signs, and what it all means for the people living there.
Right. And what we've learned is that governing isn't just about having the right structures and institutions.
How about the people?
Exactly. It's about their lives, their dreams, their ability to thrive.
And ultimately, it's about giving them the power to shape their own future.
Yeah.
We started this deep dive asking, is Nepal really without a government? And I think we found that the answer is a lot more complicated than just a simple yes or no.
They have the structure in place.
Right.
But it's whether it actually works. That's the real question.
And that lack of a working system has real consequences for the Nepalese people.
Absolutely. But even with those challenges, there's also a spirit of resilience, a determination to build a better future.
So as we wrap up our look at Nepal's political landscape, we want to leave you with this final thought. What can we learn from the experiences of the Nepalese people? What can we take away from their struggles and their successes?
Maybe it's a reminder that even when things are really hard, hope can still exist.
Yeah.
And that working towards a better future is always worth it no matter how difficult the journey might be.
And as we've seen in Nepal, that journey is often a shared one. It takes collaboration, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of people to make change happen.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Nepal's political landscape. We hope you found it informative, engaging, and thought-provoking.
We encourage you to keep exploring the world around you, to stay curious, and to never stop trying to understand the complex issues that shape our lives.
Until next time, keep diving deep.